So the first couple of letters are the sounds that are the easiest to make and the most frequent in the Hebrew language. So it's not starting with aleph and ending with taf. It's going with the letters that we're going to be able to grab easily and use quickly in our study. So that's what's happening here. Let's take a look at the very first page. If you look on page 5, you'll see that there's 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. So right away we should feel encouraged that this is a finite amount of stuff we're going to be doing. If you flip to the very, very back of the book, what you're going to see way in the back is a sheet that looks like this. A little folding thing. It's very nice. I like this very, very much. If you open it up to the inside, and you'll see this. You'll see something like this. Here's all 22 letters. And as we started talking about last week, in Hebrew, when we say letter, we mean consonant. The vowels, which in English we call it like an A and an E and I, we call those letters. In Hebrew, the vowels are not letters. They're little dits and dashes that show up around the letters, the consonants. So that's what's happening here. The other thing I just want to mention is, so if you look at this column here where it says letter name, and you'll see them go all the way down here. Some letters are final letters, meaning that when they're in the last position of a word, they have a slightly different shape. Not all letters are in the final position here. So when you go down this list, if you look at the first one is a mem sophi, the final mem. It looks different if it's in the last position. There's only a few of those. That's all part of your 22. The other thing that's nice is that most of the letters sound like their name. So that makes it easy to learn that. If you open now to the back page, the glossy page, here, what you're seeing here are the vowels. And over the course of this session, we're going to learn all of these vowels. But the important thing to look at with the vowels is that very last column. And you begin to get a sense of where the vowels can show up in relationship to the letter. Do you see how they can be underneath it, to the side, to the top? Do you see what I'm saying? So that's kind of, like you won't believe it, but within a week or two your brain will be doing that. It will automatically be deciphering as it looks at a visual image, which is totally opposite to, if you think about how we teach children to read, how very, like this, your eyes are going to go, what? And then it's going to take all that and squeeze it together. It's very, very amazing. All right, so now that you understand the big picture, now let's go to starting with the great beginning. So first, we're going to learn 3 letters. Hey, John, did you get the request to shut the sound off in the phone? Okay, thank you.
Let me ask you.
Are we too loud?
No.
Oh,
Yes, I can.
oh, wait, they're just warming up. Wait till they start now.
We were doing our breakfast song, and I just wanted to ask you as we were rapping in there, is that too loud to be able to?
It's okay. If you rap lightly, it's not too much.
It was okay before the we're okay.
Yeah. So the 3 letters that we're going to learn today, the first one is a bet. And the letter that you're seeing on the far right-hand side is, as we said last week, we're going to be looking at print and script, but we're going to be reading primarily print, because that's what most things are written. And if you look at the first one over to the far right, you'll see that it looks something like this. The little dot in the center is actually quite important. It's not a vowel. It's called in Hebrew a dagesh, and it makes the bet a bet, as opposed to another letter, which I won't confuse you with. That would be if it wasn't that way. So this is what a bet looks like. And as you can imagine, the bet makes a b sound. And some of the letters, their sound in English and their sound in Hebrew is identical, and some there's like a slight nuance, like a difference between a Spanish R and an English R. There's that kind of slight nuance. In the case of the bet, it's exactly as we say B in English. So that's the very, very first one.
So,
Yes.
just to clarify, if we see a dot and it's not outside the form of this box, then it would be...
Yes, a dagesh, exactly. Yes.
So it is for all the instances where the
Yes, very good. I don't know if you can hear Kim's question. She asked about the dot in the middle of the letter. Her question was, if you see a dot contained within the framework of a letter, is it always to be known that that's part of the letter? And the answer is yes. The vowel dots will show up not in the body of the letter. They'll show up on the periphery of the letter, which sounds complicated, but you'll see it's not so complicated. So that is a bet. That makes a b sound. And it makes that sound if it's in the first position, the last position, the middle, it's consistently going to be b. The next letter is, I want to draw it the way they draw it. Just like in English, how you can have different handwriting, and also in Hebrew you can too. So I want to teach, like, you know, when you're teaching your children how to write, you always want to be careful to teach them the right way. The next one is, it's called shin. And shin makes a sh sound. Now, what's tricky about shin is the dot. In this case, the dot shows up on top, but it's part of the consonant. And why this is tricky is because there will be another letter that was identical to this with the dot over here that makes a slightly different sound. And I'm going to mention that when you see shin, think of Chicago. You'll understand why when we get to the other letter. But this is shin, and whereas in English we need an S and an H to make that sound, in Hebrew just one letter by itself makes that sound. And it's the same if it's at the front, the middle, the back, makes that sound. The last letter is called tav. And it's the T, it's one of the T sounds. The important thing about the tav is the toe. This is going to help you to remember. So I'm going to write Chicago here, which will confuse you because of the SH versus the CH. And this is tav. It's very funny for me to see shin and bet together. Does anybody know what shin bet is?
Isn't that,
The Israel, Israel.
Yeah, it's the Israeli internal intelligence. It's like our FBI versus Mossad, which is their like CIA, is their external. So shin bet is very funny. It's like if you see FBI or something. Okay, so this is bet. It's a b sound. Now you can always remember it by the belly. See, it has a belly button. And that's what we teach the children that way. So this is the belly button. And this is shin with Chicago, and tav has the toe. Now why I'm emphasizing the toe is very soon that, oh yes.
Do you mind moving the whole thing over into the middle?
To the middle, sorry. Is that good here?
Thank you.
Okay. And please interrupt me, because I just ran on for an hour. So what's important about the toe is very soon, a lot of these Hebrew letters will start to look the same. And you'll be like, well, how can you see the difference? Again, it's amazing how quickly the eye can be trained to pick up the most subtle of differences. So I'm drawing your attention to this toe here, because this letter looks like about 3 other letters, except they don't have toes. So the toe is for tav. Now, just to make things totally insane, sometimes when you see tav, you might see it with or without the dot in it. It makes the same sound. So now we've learned that these dots can show up to make things different, as in vowels, or they can be irrelevant.
As so much of life.
Yeah, the whole trick of life is knowing what to ignore and what to pay attention to. Sometimes they show up at the same guys. So why should the Hebrew letters be in here? So that's what we're going to focus on for today.
So we should make this official.
Are there any questions so far? We're going to dive right into the exercises. Any questions so far? We're not confused yet. Okay. So what I want to do is I'm going to start right over here. And we're going to, look at this next section. Do you see how the arrow is going this way? This is, so you'll notice that the arrow is going this way because And again, that's going to take a little bit of, very quickly your brains will adjust to that, but just know that that's coming. So what I want to do is I want to start doing this, and what you're going to do is just say the name of the letter and just say the sound in it. So I'll do the very first one. You would say bet, but.
Shin, sh.
Good.
Ta, ta.
Bet, but.
Ta.
And this sound. Good.
Shin, sh.
Ta.
Bet, b.
Shin, sh.
Bet, ba.
Ta,
Good, good. Very, very good. Now, in English, the letters of the alphabet represent both consonant sounds and vowels. In Hebrew, the letter represents consonant sounds, while vowels are indicated by symbols that are written above, below, or beside them. In this chapter, we will introduce two vowels that are written below the Hebrew letters. These two symbols indicate the same sound. What this is saying is that sometimes the same sound can be produced by two different looking symbols. So don't get confused by that. These both make the ah as in father. One looks like a flat line, and one looks like a flat line with a little tiny stem that comes out, so like almost a tiny T. So what happens when you read in Hebrew is the consonant comes first. I'm doing this in slow motion. Here's how your brain's going to take it in. Your eye's going to first see the consonant and make consonant sound in your head, and then your eye will go to the vowel and think vowel sound, and then it'll mush it together. So that's slow motion what's going to be happening. Does that make sense?
The vowel is always after the consonant.
Yes. Good. That's a good question. Let me just say again what Kim just said. The vowel is always after the consonant. So your next question should be, well, how do you have a word like ahava, which means love? How do you start with that? The secret is to have silent consonants. So then what vowel means? That's how it does. That's how it. So your head is still seeing the vowel, the consonant first, but it's silent. Go right to the vowel. That's how that works. We're not there yet. That's the next. It's coming class. Okay. So is everybody good with that? Is everybody good with where we are? So now we're going to actually start reading. Let's go and look at, when reading letters and vowels, sound the consonant first, then the vowel. For example, I'm at the bottom of the page. Sound the b first, then the ah. So b and ah produce ba. Does everybody see that? Sound the shin first, the sh, and then the ah. So that's sha. Does everybody get how that works? Now we're going to be, yes.
Is there a reason why one versus the other, or does that not matter?
This is a very good question. So the question is, if they both make the same sound, why would you use sometimes the flat and sometimes the one with the T, the little T? The answer is that even Israelis misspell with vowels. And that vowels are taken out of all written material after the age of like 5 or 6. So if you look at it, we're going to Israel, so you guys know you've been to Israel. If you pick up the newspaper, there's no vowels in it. The only people who use vowels are like pre-kindergartners and foreigners. Maybe people don't say but the point is that vowels are much more in English. To be fluent in English, your vowels and your consonants would be on the same level. You wouldn't even distinguish that. But not so in Hebrew. Not so. It's very confusing. So it's simply a memorization. There's no rule for when it would be one or the other. You'd have to have seen that word with vowels so many times that you knew it was always spelled that way. So that even after they took away the vowels after the age of 5, you would always remember it that way. Which is why they make
Training.
vowels. Yeah. It's a kind of memorization, but there's no, you can't say like, I after, 83, it's not like that. So for those of us who are learning it as a foreign language, it's really a lot of visual, so that then that imprints in our brains so that we always know. But the good news is that rarely are we going to be called upon to write. Remember what we said in our first session, that our primary skill that we're trying to acquire is to read, and especially liturgical stuff, then Torah stuff, and then hopefully maybe some people want to go into more speaking, conversational stuff.
How could, not to confuse that, but how could be misspelling if, when you learn the Ashkenazi, there is a difference if you learn I and O? I mean, there is a difference.
So let's not get too much into that right now, because it's going to confuse some of the people who don't
That's why I don't
totally
know.
understand that.
But
There
must
is
be
going to be, we talked last week a little bit about some of the Ashkenaz versus Sephardic pronunciation. And so that vowel that can go both ways is this little T one, but there's also, it's going to confuse you, because there's also an O vowel. I don't want to mess people like that. All right, but let's go now with reading. So we're on the top of page 6, and could we, where did we leave, did you do the last one?
I completed my assignment.
Okay, so Bruce, you start with that first, now we're going to hear red.
Ta,
Good.
Shah.
Ba. Ta. Sha. Ta. Ba. Ta.
Shah.
Sha.
sha.
Good. So you are catching on very quickly, we're getting there. In both Hebrew and English, a syllable can consist of a single consonant and a single vowel, as in the line of Hebrew that we just read above. A syllable can also consist of a consonant-vowel-consonant combination, such as in the words bat or tot in English. Just for your information, one is called closed and one is called open. When a syllable ends in an open, a vowel sound, that's called open, and when it ends in a consonant, that's called closed. This, we won't be handling that on this level, but it does deal with grammatical rules for later on in life, in Hebrew anyway. So now we're going to read closed syllable sounds. Wait, come on, you do that? Wait, Judson.
No, I'm not.
Oh, sorry, Tracy, go ahead.
Shot.
Good.
Ba.
Ba.
What are the third one? Say this, I'm sorry.
Ta.
Good.
Tosh.
Bash,
Shah.
Sha. Ba. Ta. Bat. Tat. Tosh. Wash.
Which way? The second to the end.
Oh, this one. Wash. Shush.
Good.
Such a weird sound. Okay. See the picture.
Shah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, I'm gonna grab Karen's example, so just an example, because I want to unpack what she just did, because we will all do that at some point. Her first response, and you can't hear as well, because I think I'm the one who speaks really loud here, is she said, wash. Now, she's smiling. Why did she say wash? I'm going to unpack what her little brain just did. Her brain saw this shin, and it didn't know it yet, because she's just learning this language. So the brain was going, what the heck? And it found an orthography that it did know, which is a W. And the brain did this. It said, oh, that shin looks like a W. So it supplied the W sound, but then the brain picked it up on the shin again. Do you see how that worked? Why am I telling you this? Some of the letters look like letters in English, but don't sound like letters in English. This is really going to scramble your brains. So, Karen, is that what happened inside your brain? Yeah, okay. So, the good news is your mistakes will be finite too. There's only about 7 or 8 different kinds of mistakes you can make. And none of them are lethal, okay? So nobody's going to die from it. So know that will happen. And it's kind of fun when that happens, because you realize, oh, brain, what are you doing? You're trying. The brain is literally doing this. Oh, new information. What am I going to grab? So that's what we'll do. That's what's happening. So don't be confused when that happens to you. Just everybody's going to help each other, and know that that's kind of decoding error is what that is. That's just a little decoding error. Yeah.
So if you were to look at the first line and the first 2 letters, if you didn't have the vowel in there, what would the sound be?
The first line, the first 2.
Yeah.
So you would have a shin and a top.
Yeah, but we can say
Oh.
shot because we have an A in there, but what if you didn't have that in there?
Okay, so Kim's question is, how would you read it without the vowel? And the answer is, you couldn't read it unless you had the context. And this is what's hard about Hebrew. So if you're reading in English, this word, the act of reading in a different way than you understand the act of reading in English. In Hebrew, you have to have a context to actually be able to read that word. Do you see what I'm saying? You can't read, you would not be able to make sense of it. You neither could have comprehension or articulation if you just had a shin and a tav. You would just say that's a shin and a tav. But you wouldn't know whether you should go shot, shoot, shoot, sheet. You wouldn't know that. There's no way to know that. But if you saw it in the context of a sentence, you would know it because you were reading, you were comprehending all the pieces that came before and after it. You know what I'm saying? Similarly, in English, that doesn't work because you have that, but, that, bit and that. And if you just had this right here, you would have to know the context. You know, I blank you, I bat you, I butt you, I did you, I bet you. Do you know what I'm saying? And you would understand it in that context. Does that make sense? That answer that question?
Yeah, it makes poetry hard. Yeah, but what if there's a few things that would make sense, though?
Then you have to go, you'll keep going broader. You'll keep going broader. Which is why it's so fascinating to study. It's just a fascinating language to study. Kim also mentioned about poetry. Hebrew doesn't rhyme. They use meter instead, and assonance. So and sometimes I'll point this out in some of the prayers, that what makes it sound beautiful in a Hebrew ear is that the sound, like if it's a poem about water, there might be a lot of shins in it. And that's what makes the Hebrew listener feel poetry. Whereas cat, fat, that, rat, you know, in English that's what makes us feel poetry, right? The other thing that they have that makes poetry for them is meter. So the number of syllables where the accent falls follows a pattern, but we are almost blind to meter. Unless you're a poetry major, you actually probably don't think I'm talking about. But that sense of meter and rhythm feels poetic to them. So anyway, we digress. But okay, good, we're doing great. Let's keep reading. Longer combinations can be read by sounding out the individual syllables. Remember that some syllables will consist of just a consonant and a vowel, while others will be consonant, vowel, consonant. Meaning, how you're going to read now is you're going to go, we're past just reading letters, and we're past reading letter with a vowel. Now we're reading syllable by syllable by syllable by syllable. And the syllables, note that some will be open, meaning they'll end in a vowel, and some syllables will be closed. So now that's what they're telling us. So now we're going to get ready for that. An example is, who wants to read that word? Who wants to raise their hand and read this word? Yeah, okay.
Batash?
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Did everybody see how he did that? He started on the right-hand side and he went that way. He did a ba as an open syllable, and then he did tash as a closed syllable. He's been working for 3 weeks on it now. Oh, it's okay, good. The first syllable is a consonant. Is it a consonant?
So the first one, and then the second two make a single line?
Not always. Not always. How will you, okay, so Judson's question is, can we anticipate that the first will always be an open and the second will always be a closed? No. No. Although that's a great way to create a literary device. So again, what sounds interesting would be like if you wanted to write a poem that had that kind of a rhythm to it. But that means that therefore you can get the opposite too. You get the closed syllable and then you can get everything. So your brain will now